Welcome. I'm Daniel Parker with the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and I am joined here with Jen Townsend from CESA 1. Jen, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
And Jen is here as my resident quotes-unquote expert in structured work systems. She's done a lot of great work around structured work systems and helping students set those up in classrooms throughout the state. So I am Daniel Parker with the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. I'm the Autism and Family Engagement Consultant at DPI. I am here with Jen Townsend. Jen, do you want to say anything about your work in CESA 1?
Well, gosh, we are starting to do so many things within the state, Daniel, that I'm excited to continuously be a part of these opportunities, these webinars with you. I think that our state and our region as a whole is really embracing the idea that students with social learning differences, including autism, are incredibly competent and bright individuals, and we need to validate their communication and validate their abilities. And we're starting to do it, and we're starting to see it across the board, and we're starting to see such great, meaningful instruction happening within the schools, which is fantastic. Another piece I do have to comment on is we're starting and continuing to have more and more connections with families and outside agencies.
That's great.
So those meetings are starting to happen, the walls are coming down, and it's really exciting, and I think that's great compliments to the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'll be really interested to hear how, better, and more increased family engagement really affects those outcomes for students. So we have a lot of research on that, so I appreciate your efforts.
Absolutely.
Today we're going to be talking about a quick review of evidence-based practice in students with autism. We're going to be really getting into what are structured work systems and different ways to use them and tips and tweaks in how to use those work systems. We're going to be giving you examples across developmental and grade levels. Work systems really can work very well at all stages and levels, so we're going to be really trying to incorporate different work systems in different levels, and we're also going to be talking about how work systems might be able to be used in home settings as well. So that's kind of our general introduction to what we're going to be doing. A couple of assumptions. One big one always is presuming competence. So I know that there will be some people who may feel that students have extreme significant needs, and there are students that are nonverbal, have extreme movement needs, lots of difficulty in their ability to communicate skillfully. But have you used structured work systems with those students, Jen?
Absolutely, and I think that a lot of times those students benefit the most out of structured work systems because we stop talking so much at the student and around the student and for the student, and we start to be more cognizant of what the student can do, because work systems are built around increasing independence for a student. And so I think it really does allow us to validate the student's abilities instead of focusing on the disability.
Great. Another piece to this, another assumption, is making sure that we are all working to help students become more skillful and independent. And another piece, the big one, is, and this was, Jen, something that you really wanted to make clear, and we're going to talk about this, the difference between a structured work system, meaning more of a discrete trial format, which is very teacher-directed, and structured work systems that are focused more independently. And we kind of put together to have this conversation at the beginning around this assumption of the difference between discrete trial and direct instruction versus structured work system. So with discrete trial and direct instruction, those of you who are familiar, there's a focus on percent mastery. It's very teacher initiated. There's lots of prompts and error correction procedures. So it's very much, the teacher is highly involved on a minute or second by second basis in reinforcement, working with the student. Typically we use discrete trial to teach new skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we're teaching those discriminations. And the teacher has a direct presence, very hands-on. And there's lots of, often discrete trial systems have a heavy external reinforcement system attached where students are getting reinforced almost for every response sometimes. So work us through the flip side of that with structured work systems.
Yeah, so a lot of times we say to ourselves, gosh, the students mastered this in their discrete trial format, but what do we do with it now? How do we take it somewhere? Where else can it go? And can it run simultaneously with a structured work system? And the answer is yes. And when you really look at a structured work system, you're focusing on the independence, the independent abilities of the student to perform the skill or demonstrate the skill, the task, the activity. A lot of times it is student initiated. Although we get the student there or we support the student in arriving at the work system location, it is the student doing the work. The work that's put into the system is based on what the student can do or what the student can persist at doing versus what we need to teach the student. And I think a big component of that, Daniel, is teaching the generalization of an independent or mastered skill. And when you think about, like, we get so stuck on it has to be, sometimes we get stuck on, I can't say we all do, but sometimes we get stuck on it has to meet mastery in order for us to generalize, or have to get to proficiency before we can generalize it. A work system will allow us to be more hands-off and really find out where that just right student independent level is in the task analyses to put it into a work system. And it relies heavily on internal reinforcement.
Mm-hmm. And when we say internal reinforcement, that's student-driven,
yes.
Students wanting to engage in the task just because it's meaningful, it's interesting, it's engaging, etc.
Exactly, and they are motivated intrinsically inside of them. Like, it's the same thing that takes us to work every day. It's the same thing that makes us want to go home every day. It's that internal drive. It is a huge predictor, and the research would support us in the fact that internal reinforcement and being intrinsically motivated has higher quality of life outcomes than always relying heavily on external reinforcement. Now, granted, we all need external reinforcement in order to do certain things, and a student with a social learning difference and an individual with a social learning difference is no different than you and I for that. However, a structured work system does provide the student an opportunity to be independent in what they can demonstrate and the skills they can do.
Great. All right. And if you have any questions about those differences, feel free to type those into the chat box. Again, a big assumption is that this is going to take a lot of teaching. So this one, we as educators, we're teaching, as families, we're teaching and making sure that we're teaching to make students more skillful and really more independent. This is a big one on independence. So those are a couple of our assumptions. I'm not going to go over terms used today, but if you have questions about anything that we're saying or any terms that we're using, if you would just type those in, or you can email us with questions about any of those terms, but those are included in the information and packet. A lot of the information is coming from Teach, which they were the folks who kind of developed these structured work systems formats, and there's an agency out there, and there's links to their website there, and we'll be referencing that throughout the day. But Teach is the organization that did a lot of work in developing the structures for structured work systems. All right, so let's do a very quick review. It's just really important, these slides, just to point out that this is an evidence-based practice. If you ever want to know more about evidence-based practice, you can request or view the webinar that we did on the MPDC and ASD website. The National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorders, a lot of the information that we're sharing today came from them, and they have established a series of evidence-based practices. There's a quick screenshot of their website. And they have included steps for implementation and implementation checklists. We have looked at their steps for implementation, and we're kind of expanding on those in our presentation. And as you can see, there's several evidence-based practices, including things like discrete trial, that they've identified, and they have some really good resources there. And I would encourage people to really go and check that site. Big disclaimer that, just because this is an evidence-based practice, it doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily be effective for every single learner. And if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And with structured work systems, I would imagine you might have to greatly modify based on that individual.
Absolutely. I think something that's really fascinating with structured work systems, and a lot of the teams and educators that I get a chance to work with will say, gosh, Jen, once we connected it to a high interest, they were so motivated to want to be there and want to do it, that the students really started to feel very proud of their independence and their abilities to be independent and share that with other people. So again, very different for different people, and we'll talk about a lot of those differences today in this webinar and this opportunity with you guys.
Yep. So keep in mind that it may not be as effective for some learners than others, and even when it's not working for a specific student, we'll give you some tips and ideas of what to look for if you feel it's not working, because it may just have to be really, really modified for that individual around their interests and around their specific needs.
And I think a big thing we're going to highlight for you guys is sometimes we forget to teach the work system to the learner. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about not forgetting how to do that.
And in terms of, I kind of have a set of slides on students' basic needs. This is really going to work with accessing communication systems. Structured work systems communicate to learners what they need to do and what activities they can engage in and how to be independent. It certainly is able to, we're going to be emphasizing ways of how to get the general education curriculum and develop that so that it fits inside of a structured work system as well. So we'll be talking about ways to do that. Structured work systems are inherently intended to be meaningful, motivating, and engaging for students, so that fits in there really nice. And you really have to have a relationship with your students and know that your students to be able to implement these well. This is not something that someone that doesn't really know the student would be able to implement with the student with much success.
Not at all.
All right. And it's extremely visual, as you will see as well. So it meets a lot of those basic needs that I've kind of outlined in my professional development. There's also, if the MPDC ASD, if the PDFs that they have for step-by-step instructions aren't quite what you're looking for, you can go to Autism Internet Modules, where they also have the step-by-step instructions and implementation checklist, but they do it in a little bit different format, and they kind of guide you through that module, and you can kind of just really see there. And I would challenge everyone, if you're an educator, if you're a family member on an IEP team working with schools or a professional, it's not enough just to implement a work system, but we should really make sure we're implementing it the way the research has shown to be effective, which means we're implementing with fidelity. So keep in mind that we really, really need to look away from our kind of more, just kind of trying to set up the environment, but we really need to be teaching this and teaching it with fidelity. So let's get into it here. What is a structured work system? So we wanted to phrase this. We want you guys to start thinking about skills that ways students demonstrate knowledge or content of skills. So we want you to start prime your thinking here. What are different ways students are able to show you knowledge of a content area or a skill? And just type that into the question box. We're going to take 30 seconds for you to do that, and then we'll return. All right, thank you. So we have some different people talking about writing, drawing, acting out, responding. They could use an electronic device, verbally through written assignment tests, let's see, by doing or saying, tactily, kinesthetically. So we have some nice ones. Jen, what are some other ways that you think of ways students are demonstrating knowledge of what they've done?
I think that you caught me off guard for a second there, Daniel, because I was reading a lot of the responses. I was really interested in what people were saying and how they are using them. I think what's really fantastic to read is that, a lot of people are using them by doing or saying or different activities, writing, drawing, acting out, responding. I see UDL in here, and I really get excited about that because that's an overall educational practice for students and for us as educators. So thank you guys for catching me completely off guard and typing in some fantastic responses. It's much appreciated.
Yeah. And I'm sending to all some of these responses so you guys can see some of the things that are coming up. I'm just kind of responding yes to a few of these, and I'll continue to do that as we move forward. All right, so let's move along. So Jen, again, so with structured work systems, how do you define them to people that are unfamiliar? Because a lot of people probably aren't familiar with this as a specific practice.
Yeah, I think something that a quick definition of them is it is a space that's visually organized that provides the opportunity for a student to understand the expectations, complete them independently, and clearly know when they are all done, they've met the expectation.
Great. So one of the pieces that I kind of, if you really wanted to break it down really simple, it's just organizing structures allowing students to demonstrate content independently. So you're organizing some type of system or structure where the student is demonstrating any type of content or skill, and they're doing it independently. Mm-hmm. So let's take a look at kind of how that is. This is one visual. So a structured work system might look like a visual schedule for a student, especially maybe students that are extremely verbal, that have good, strong academic skills. A structured work system for them might be all written on paper and kind of look like a schedule, right?
Absolutely.
All right. And but at the same time, how is a structured work system different than a visual schedule?
Within the structured work system are the clear expectations of the task. Those are more like the direction, Daniel, that you would have on an activity. Mm-hmm. A structured work system, when it's set in its most basic form, will provide you the instructions for how to complete the task, given organization, placement of items, so that you can do the work that you're being asked to do. Great. And that's the big difference between a visual schedule and a structured work system. Is it's a system. The schedule is just that. It's the schedule. It helps you visualize and know what you're supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. The work system will help you engage and initiate and complete what you've been asked to do.
So maybe for some learners, again, how we came back to it, for some learners that don't, that just the schedule itself initiates the actions, then a structured work system and visual schedule are very similar. But we know that for many of our learners, just having a visual schedule does not get them to start the work, engage in the work, and finish the work or activity. I use the term
move on to the next thing.
And move on, yeah. And independently move on to the next thing, yes, great. Another nice visual here, and we've used this before, and Jen has brought this out, is talking about structured work systems and kind of where that falls in overall kind of structured teaching and supports. And previously we did a webinar on visual boundaries, which is kind of the basis. We'll be doing a couple webinars on visual schedules in the spring, but this work system kind of is a little bit more higher advanced level.
It is, and a work system can't work in isolation. It does need a visual schedule and physical structures and visual boundaries to make it work. And so as you can see in the pyramid idea, a lot of times, and I think, Daniel, you and I intentionally schedule schedules towards the end of the year, because so often we get stuck. If we just make the visual schedule, they should be able to do it. And we forget what surrounds the visual schedule are the other components that are necessary for them to be successful, which are the visual boundaries and the work system, the visual supports for that. So I think that pyramid is such a powerful visual for us to use.
And three huge pieces of a work system to give you an idea of what a work system looks like is you have instructions, organization, and clarity. Mm-hmm. So with the instructions piece, you're providing information on how to complete the task. And what are jigs? We know what materials are, but how do you explain jigs?
So sometimes, like, you think about a retail store, and there's somebody who is folding shirts. And they have that little plastic thing that has, you lay the shirt flat on there, and they don't even think about folding a shirt. They just smack these little plastic things, fold it together, and then the shirt's automatically folded. That would be a jig for folding a shirt. Sometimes you have different jigs, like a mechanic has a jig for different things. A woodworker has a jig when they're using a certain pattern on the bandsaw. So all the different things that you would use so that the activity is done the exact same way would be considered a jig.
Great, thank you. And then for organization, there's a couple pieces to it. We're simplifying the tasks. We're breaking them down. We do a lot of that. We're making sure that only the necessary materials are present. We'll be talking about that. So if you're doing a structured work system, it's going to look very clean. It's going to be very transparent. You're only going to have a few items in front of you that really direct the learner to what they're doing. And that would be a structured work system for a student that needs a lot of support.
Absolutely.
Obviously, you could have a structured work system that has a lot more clutter in the environment, but if we're really doing this for a learner with significant needs, it's going to be really, really, a nice space for the activity and just the needed materials there for them.
And if there are other materials, because space is of the essence when we think about education, if there are other materials present, using those visual boundaries to show where the work system is within that location is really powerful. A lot of teachers say, Jen, I just don't have an extra space to give up. but when the work system comes out, here are the boundaries that we use for that work system. That's a great way to make sure that organization stays very, very clear for that student to understand. These are the materials I'm expected to be working on, and nothing else is going to come in this space for me to complete this work.
And we've talked about having, using sheets to cover up parts, or using tablecloths to say this is going to be the activity at this time and use a different color for another time. So there's different ways you can do that with limited space.
Absolutely.
And then clarity is that third part. Again, you're limiting the materials on the work surface. So you're going to see some color coding here. You're going to see some numbers and sequential and those types of things to clearly kind of show what you're looking at. And just to kind of give you an idea, we have a little clip here, and there's no sound on this clip, so you don't need to hear anything. But let me pull this clip over. So we're going to show this, and Jen, walk us through this clip. This is just a YouTube video that you found, and what is this person doing?
So if you look in this video, you can actually see the work system sitting on the desk, and he's doing it on his right because apparently he might be a lefty, and so he needs more space on his left. It just depends on what's most preferable for the individual. This is a top-to-bottom work system, Daniel, where the tasks are supposed to go first top drawer, second middle drawer, last bottom drawer. He's independently initiating that. He has a very small in-task strip that he just reached for right there, and that's telling him this is how much work I'm being expected to do. It's a picture-picture matching system. So he's grabbing a picture and he's matching it, which is a huge strength of somebody with a social learning difference, to the drawer that has the activity in it. He's pulling it out. He's motivated by the work that's in there. It's probably file folders that he's done for forever, and he knows how to do them. But for so long, so many people have been talking around him or telling him how to do it, or don't put it there, or do it faster, or hurry up, you don't have enough time. Whereas right here, he's motivated to get through this work system. He's intrinsically motivated to do it by himself to prove that he can do these things. What's nice about this work system, though, Daniel, is it could be set up in a gen ed classroom. It could be something that is, and if you look at that clip, you saw over his shoulder, there was another drawer bin next to another student's desk in that classroom. Although that was an adult demonstrating that skill and how to use that work system, that's exactly how it can be done within a gen ed classroom. And many of the teachers that I work with, the gen ed teachers, have 5 or 6 of those bins and top to bottom bins in their classroom, and they have them preset for literature, for independent reading, for writer's workshop, and it's really pretty fascinating.
And so what we saw, so that he had two kind of things going on. He had the bins, which had different activities in them, and then he also had an in-task kind of visual schedule, and he was matching, so he would pull off the icon from the bin and then match it to the visual schedule, or vice versa. And then so one question, we might get to this later, so that's great, and those file folders could have been anything, any type of skill. We're going to be talking about the types of skills, and they could be at any developmental level, the types of skills. Now, can you tell us, in case we don't come to this later, what would be the benefit of teaching a student to do something like that? What we saw was it was an adult kind of modeling this, and it took maybe 2 minutes, right, to go through it. Well, if a student is going through, let's say even just 5 or 6 minutes, what's the benefit of having a student go through a series of 2 or 3 very simple activities independently and showing them how to do that for students with more significant needs? Why is that such an important thing to do, even if it's 5 minutes out of the day? Teachers are sometimes going to be maybe looking for, I need something to engage these learners for 6 hours in a day.
Yeah.
Why would you do this even just for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes in a day?
Daniel, I think it's presuming competence. It's really allowing that student to be able to demonstrate, hey, guess what? I can do something completely by myself, and I know how to do it. You've taught me all these fantastic things. Now let me show you that I can still do it. Let me show you that I don't need you to sit right next to me. Because remember, that person object isn't always going to be next to that student, and there needs to be that intrinsic and independent initiation to want to do the task. And so even if you only get that for 5 minutes, 10 minutes out of a day, my gosh, you just told that student in those 5 minutes, you can do something completely by yourself. And the probability that the student's going to want to do something by themselves in the future when they feel successful doing those things is greater. And that's just the sheer numbers.
And also, I'm sure you can kind kind of build that up too. You get a student, 10, 15 minutes working on a few tasks, and as their skills increase and can do more things independently, you can build other things into those work systems.
What's really amazing about it, Daniel, is that teachers will say, wow, I needed to invest in the materials themselves, so I had enough to pre-prep because this student enjoys working in these so much that they'll start building their own systems, and then you start seeing the peers wanting to set the system up. It's really quite neat to watch it in action, especially in a gen ed setting for a student with those significant needs that you were talking about earlier, with lots of motoric needs. Yes, it seems like it might only be 5 minutes, but really if the student's doing something like that fast over and over again, let's up the ante. And let's not forget to up the ante on that.
And let's think about, for those students, are there other things that they're doing in that level independently during their day? I mean, if they're not, then 5-10 minutes, that's a great place to start.
Right.
Because all you can do is build from there.
And we're going to talk about how to transfer that too, Daniel, across multiple settings. Not just a work system isn't just sitting at the desk doing the work.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about how, if the student can be successful using a top-down or left or right work system at a table or a surface area, how do we put that in other places? How do we then combine that need for that movement with a work system? And we've got high school students using carts to deliver mail and drop off things and collect other things. It's fascinating to watch how you guys have set up some of these work systems in our schools.
This is a quick picture of just kind of a file folder for different subject areas for a work system. We saw a folder, and then this might be, these were the work systems that I knew that Teach was developing, and this is kind of what I was trained in maybe the 90s, and they showed us how to kind of teach students to use these. So, on each of these, you can kind of see that there's a little icon there on each of these bins, and students can then match to schedule these icons so they know which bin to go to.
And they're taking those, the in-task strip is what they have on their desk, and they're taking that icon off of their mini schedule and putting it onto the bin. This one right here is quite neat because this is a student who is using this almost like a mini locker, because all of his materials are found throughout this, and so he was never prepared for any of his classes and is fully able to participate in the class work, but never felt calm enough because he never had all his materials.
So this would be a student that might be scary to go in his desk in a traditional, because I had students like that where it's just, they had such a hard time. If you think of a desk where you cannot see what's in there and it's up to you. I mean, I remember as a teacher having to weekly clean out students' desks and surprise what I find in there and all of that. But when you have these nice, clear structures for the task, and it also gives students a movement break, right?
Absolutely.
So he can get up and he's going over there throughout the day to get the materials, so it allows for that movement piece.
And as you noticed, the student needed a visual boundary for where to keep his shoes too, because those were always found throughout the classroom.
If you're looking for research based on structured work systems, there's a nice link to the MPDC ASD, but there is a lot of research in this area. Some reasons why we like structured work systems, it reduces that teacher prompting. It's all about independence. It's visually organized. And it has that, for students on the spectrum, that clear beginning and end points and predictable expectations. Again, for students with autism, they are very visual. I like how you put that they help students foreshadow what's going to happen next. That's huge. We know that a lot of students have stress and anxiety. And if we can reduce that by having them more clearly understand what's next, and we can have a visual schedule, but those structured work systems might add even more support in that area to understand what's happening. And we talked about the incorporation of movement and sensory and that high interest items. What are some items that students have enjoyed that you've seen incorporated into work systems?
I think Cars movies right now are really big, and having the picture-picture matching being the different characters within that movie. I think other high interest, sometimes kids like those algebraic equations, and so you get x plus 4 equals, and then the answer is actually in the bottom drawer, and they're super excited to finish that. So kind of playing on some of their strengths and their interests there.
Sure. A few more slides here just to kind of talk about, how these structured work systems can help students with autism. We have the why it's difficult. They have a hard time predicting. Many students have a hard time predicting what's next. There's a piece of is it meaningful? I mean, if it's not meaningful and they understand why this is happening or what's the outcome, the structured work system can help move that along and assist with that. Another one with transitions, we're going to be showing you some specific structured work systems to work with transitions. And that could be transitions like going from point A to point B within the classroom or around the building or within the house or throughout the day. But it can also be just transitioning into an activity and out of an activity. We have a lot of students that have difficulty with that. So this provides some supports in that area as well.
It really helps, Daniel, on that last slide is they may not know what to expect. And so often we ask students to transition and they arrive at empty desk syndrome. And work systems really get away from that because a work system does allow that transition into a very clear expectation because it's been identified, it's very organized, and we have clarified exactly what we want them to be doing at that time. And so that transition initiated by others is so much easier to get into when we know what to expect.
I know that some research with the Groden Center, and I've given this out in other webinars, this Groden Stress Survey, and I can put that in the Dropbox, but they found in their center, there's a center in Rhode Island that has a stress and anxiety survey for students with autism, but some of the #1 stressors, I mean, being told no is a big one, but waiting, huge stressor.
Yep.
And you think about how often students have to wait for something to start.
Absolutely. But how unpredictable is waiting? And think about your own waiting abilities when you're standing in line and you're trying to get grocery shopping done and the game starts in 30 minutes and you just want to get home and you're getting more anxious and more worked up, and then when you finally get up there you're quite rude to the cashier and you don't even realize it. Sure. So again, keeping the perspective on ourselves as well as on our students.
And oftentimes when that student is waiting, we might be engaged as teachers. We might be setting things up or looking at the instructions we're about to give or reviewing the lesson we're about to do or engaging in a conversation with another staff or another peer or helping someone else. But from that student's perspective, so we're not waiting, but they may be. So again, these structured work systems can work if you presume competence for students at any developmental or grade level and work at various systems. So we'll be showing some examples of that. And we do want to just, that structured teaching and universal design for learning, or UDL, there are some similarities between structured teaching and UDL. Universal design for learning is just a framework that allows educators to structure, assistance for all learners. And as we're doing this, I want to encourage people to think about, principles of universal design, if those are things that you're building and structures are talking about, how structured work systems might fit into that for a variety, a small classroom of learners or a group of learners. Although it is very individualized, it kind of works there. This slide kind of gives you an example of a UDL principle, and it just kind of shows a student who uses a wheelchair, and he's waiting for the guy with the shovel to clear off the ramp, and he says, hey, can you help shovel that ramp? And the guy says, oh, I'll do it after I finish clearing off the steps. All these kids are waiting to get in, and the student using the wheelchair says, yeah, but if you clean off the ramp, everyone can get in. So I thought that's just kind of an idea there of principles of UDL. And when we talk about if you're looking at UDL or using UDL principles, definitely there's some overlap with structured work systems in terms of representation, how we are luring students into activities and getting them to engage, as well as making sure that there's different ways that students can be engaged. So there can be very individualized. So you can set up work systems for students to work to their strengths and interests. So just a couple things there. I'm going to kind of move through, and if you're interested more about universal design, there's some great websites on DPI, and our consultant at DPI, Jolene Troy, our UDL consultant, can assist you if you're looking for more information as well. So here's some resources often used to implement work system, things that are laying around. Any of those kind of jump off the page at you?
I think a big one is that basic school supplies. I think a lot of times we feel like a work system has to have these bins or has to have these trays and these baskets, and really they don't. And those basic school supplies can be used within a work system. I think another one that jumps out is the task analyses of an activity. So often in special education, as a special educator, and given most of our audience is coming from that realm, we really look at creating these tasks ourselves and making the materials ourselves, when we can really look out and say, hey, gen ed teacher, what are you guys doing in class? And let me go ahead and task analyze this and figure out where the just right point is for that student, so that then I can put that content into the work system for a specific student. So not creating or not remaking materials, rather using materials that are already made, doing the task analyses, and then putting them into the system. So lots of great things in that slide there of what we need, but those are the two big ones that kind of jump out at me.
Great. I would also say, have someone on your team that is looking at fidelity of implementation. So you're looking at those step-by-step instructions that MPDC-ASD has put together, an implementation checklist. So once you start implementing, just go back and check if you're implementing it as the research has shown effective. You also want to make sure you're considering individual abilities of students when you're arranging these activities. So a couple of big ones, and Jen, you had mentioned like that left to right orientation versus top to bottom. I think previously you said, when is a good time to, if you don't know what the student's orientation is, what's a good, not every time, but maybe a ballpark assessment of whether they're going to go left to right or top to bottom of what's going to work better?
I think a lot of times if you put their most motivating things within a different sequence, you'll be able to tell very quickly. I think if you talk to your OTs, a lot of times, usually a left to right has success if the student's good at crossing midline. Usually that's the one that makes the most sense because that's the way we read. However, sometimes a student's schedule is top to bottom, so their work system needs to be left to right. But if you decided as the team, as the family, that you wanted to do a left to right visual schedule, then the work system might be top to bottom. A lot of times our kids with social learning differences have a hard time doing the same type of system with two totally different things in our pyramid. Like you think back to our pyramid, the visual schedule is a certain way, the work system should be a different way. But I think that it's just more of listening to the student, watching the student, playing around with the way you set things up that they really enjoy doing and figuring it out.
Another piece as well is that distractibility and mobility. If you have a student who has a hard time in the classroom moving from point A to point B without wanting to go in a different direction or go to a specific activity or is unsure why they're going from point A to point B, you might start your work system more like what we saw with that gentleman, kind of going through in a specific space. And then once they get used to that, then you can work up to moving around.
Absolutely, and those specific minute little steps are outlined on the step-by-step for implementation. But yes, it is really important to know if the student is a bebopper around the room, likes to jump and hop all over the place, having the materials for the work system on the other side of the room after they have to pass 3 or 4 different peers and they have to pass their favorite computer and they have to go, around this other area and into this cabinet to get them, it's not going to be successful. So thinking about it in a different way of how should I have this set up before the student comes to this work area, what type of prep work am I need to be doing on that. Other things to consider too, Daniel, is making sure that you're not making the work system too simple for the student. You really need to make sure that it matches their literacy level and it matches their ability level. Like if you're doing picture-picture matching and the student loves to solve algebraic equations, then that's kind of silly.
Yeah.
So let's not put the system at a lower level because that's what the other students are using. Let's make sure it matches their literacy level. And literacy level is a huge predictor of what we should be doing. And every kid on the spectrum it has the ability to do some type of literacy. And just really being aware of that. And matching is a literacy skill.
Yes.
Even color matching, even picture matching, even favorite movie sleeve cover to favorite movie sleeve cover is a literacy level skill. So I know that might be taking it to an extreme. However, important to think about. Another one is the sequential versus flexible thinking. Really making sure that it's something that we put into a sequence to really help the student be able to manage the system independently.
And as we said, this can be used in many settings. We're going to be doing a lot of indoor settings, but we'll talk about a couple outdoor examples as well. And it can be used to introduce independent work skills for students transitioning to post-secondary. So if you're a transition teacher and you're looking at teaching work skills, I could really see structured work systems being a great format to teach students how to do certain tasks that they may be able to do for paid employment. All right.
I think a big piece with that, Dan, I think we might talk about it later and I might be jumping ahead. However, having the student own how they set it up too, especially at that transition age, is huge, because think about how you set up your own desk and think about how you set up your own work system. Some of us are better at that than others, but if we knew how to set it up for ourselves, the probability of us using it within employment is greater.
Yes, thank you for that. We definitely will be talking about that piece around students engaging in the setup of them. So we are taking the step-by-step instructions from the MPDASD website, and we're kind of elaborating on those a little bit, but these kind of just flip through just to give you an idea of where they are, and I would encourage you, I believe I put those in the Google folder as well, so you can find them there as well. So the steps are actually pretty basic that they put together, considering the learner environment, creating the work system, and teach and monitor. So let's talk about that first one, and we're going to break this out considerably. So first, considering the learner. So before we get to environment, we talked about that distractibility and mobility factors, and we talked a little bit about this as well. So we kind of covered this piece. Is there anything else you want to add in there?
I think the coordination is big. Remembering the 7 senses, that proprioceptive component here. If you have that kid that has the dropsies, making sure that carrying objects might not be the best way to do that.
Sure.
Rather putting it on a cart and pushing the cart, because we have better vestibular abilities. So really being cautious of that coordination, when I know we didn't mention that before, and time of day for the learner, because sometimes coordination is great first thing in the morning, but then we're getting tired and our system's getting worn down, and so we really need to be mindful of that.
I like that suggestion of other ways, just because a student may not be able to carry a specific object in the way that we would like, that there's other options. Doesn't mean that if we remove that, we can find other options.
A really neat option I'll just share, since you kind of are leading me there, is we have a work system set up in a gen ed classroom for one of the students I'm working with recently, and he has all his items on the other side of the room and needs to bring them over, but in the afternoon he cannot physically carry them, the items. And at times he tries. Gosh, he does try. But man, when he drops something that's in his work system, talk about a mess. Everything just goes everywhere. And so what we've taught him, because we know one of the skills in his IEP is to ask for help. We've asked him to start figuring out what peer he could ask to help, and then he has to ask the peer to pull his materials for him. And so it's really quite neat, because he's quite motivated by wanting to do the work independently, but he also really, really needs help getting there. So he's asking a peer, hey, do you mind helping me pull some materials? He's got little power cards to coach him through that, little social narratives to help him with that. And it's fantastic. And sorry for that sidebar there, but it's
fantastic.
Kind of a neat one.
We did talk about forms of representation too. So for a structured work system, if you're using pictures with a student whose form of representation is at the object level, you're going to see difficulties.
Yep.
And we break this out when we do our visual schedules, I think, webinar in the spring. But this just kind of shows you a picture of, this is an actual fork, and this would be a first then. First, we're going to use this fork, I would assume, to eat, and then we're going to listen to music or watch a DVD. And it's kind of a first then schedule. So if you're using a work system with the student at that object level, you need to make sure you're using objects in your work system as cues. Then you might, other forms might be pictures. These are actual pictures of the person and the object. And then these are just kind of icons, and it kind of moves along a continuum there. Higher up along that continuum are words and sentences and those types of things. So, you want to make sure your forms of representation, again, matching that literacy level. So the other piece of this is then considering the environment. So you can have a workstation that's stationary, movable. Is it going to be there throughout the whole day, or is it going to be put away at some point and not always around? And what settings are you going to have those work systems? So this work system, describe for us, how this one is used.
This one is actually several different work systems that are set up in the morning, because the staff doesn't have time to do it throughout the day. So these are actually set up prior to the student coming to school for that day. And the student needs some motor breaks built in to his day. And so he comes down to where these are set up in a side room. This is the special ed classroom. But he does most of his work in the gen ed room. And these are stored in the special ed room, however. And so he walks down the hall. It's only maybe 100 feet away. He walks down the hall, he grabs the system, and he takes it back to the gen ed classroom, infusing in a quick motor break. But each of these is identified based on different colored systems throughout his day and different content areas.
Great. So, and this would be obviously a stationary if you have something in a cabinet. So it has some icons there that tell what materials are there, and you can use shelves or different things
And
for
what
work
this
systems
is
as
absolutely,
well.
and what this is really helpful with is in your work system, you can put images of materials that you might need, and you're working on this student being able to move from one point to another to start getting their materials and their supplies. So these materials are located in another cabinet, and the work system might be 10 feet away from here. But when the student gets to the second item within their system, they might need something that's in this cabinet. So they have a picture queue in their work system, and then they get up and they go find it within the location. You find these more often in home environments too, Daniel, because you can label where you're going to keep things, and you're not always going to keep all the materials out on your kitchen table because that's where you are going to be doing your homework. Rather, we're going to keep them in a drawer off to the side, but I'm going to give you a little visual cue that for this assignment you might need, or the teacher may be prepped for you that you might need some glue and scissors for this. There might be little stickers on the top of that paper, and then the student and child can go get those for themselves.
The second step here, and this is the one I think we're really breaking out a lot more, is kind of creating that work system. You're looking at who's going to set it up. So you can have the student, the learner, do that. The teacher can set up the work system, or you can have peers set it up. And you're really, just trying to figure out who's going to do what, who's going to be responsible for what, checking those materials, replacing them, sharpening pencils, I would imagine, when things get lost, putting things back together, and then figuring out who's going to do the data collection.
I think a big point to remember in there is that we don't take apart the work in front of the student because that student worked really hard to demonstrate they could do it independently. And so who replaces the materials can't be the staff member working with them at that time.
So some examples of like taking apart, if you have a work system, and let's say you're starting out with just trying to teach the work system and have some independent activities, and maybe they're putting a puzzle together.
Sure.
As soon as they put that puzzle together, you're not just going over and going, oh, good job, and then taking it apart and putting it back in there, right?
Correct, because what was the point?
Yeah.
What was the point of putting it together if you're just going to take it apart for me?
Sure.
And another key point in there is not having the same exact puzzle in there all the time, having similar puzzles so that it's not the same thing over, like, oh my God, I just did this 10 minutes ago. Why am I doing it again? Did I not do it right? So that student will start to question some of their own abilities.
Sure.
So again, just who replaces the materials, be mindful about that.
Great. And we have a couple stop and thinks here. So if you're looking at putting together a work system, you really need to be asking yourself, how long is the student going to be actively engaged and independently engaged? So you're not going to sit and put, and I'll go back to the puzzle example just because it's a simple example to use, but you're not going to do a 50-piece puzzle if a student has difficulty being engaged in activity for more than 2 minutes. But you could have a very simple 8-piece puzzle instead. Some other examples, whatever that piece of work is, if you had a creative task in there where the student maybe was writing a thank you card or a letter to somebody, or any type of maybe they were going to, create a list of spelling words or do matching activities. You just need to be thinking about how long would that student be in there. Sometimes you can use neurotypical peers, thinking developmentally at the same age, what would a student be able to do, but then you need to think of that learner's developmental level as well. All right. The second question to stop and think and ask is, what resources do you have available that matches those students' independent skills? Yeah. So you're almost kind of doing an inventory of what can the student do independently right now that we can put into a work system.
And challenge yourselves with that question, because I think for some of our kids that have more of those motoric and communication needs, we say, well, they can't do anything independently.
Yeah.
Well, that's definitely not true. And we need to take a step back, and we really need to look at, well, have we given them the opportunity to demonstrate independence at all throughout their day? And if not, let's go ahead and entice that. Let's go ahead and put some things out there that we know they're going to be independent with. And, maybe we start with some of those more tangible things where they have to open up containers and get their favorite item to play with, or open up different, GLAD has those fantastic little things. We have one guy that is not very good at doing Ziplocs, but that's a great thing to put reinforcers in a Ziploc bag and teaching to open the Ziploc and get the item out and consume it, and then cleaning up. I mean, so every child has a level of independence.
Yeah. So if a fine motor skill is unopening Ziploc bags, and you put a very small amount of a preferred item in there, if the family and everyone thinks this is going to work, the top drawer of a work system, they open it up, They pull out a baggie, they open it up, they do that, then they put that away or they put it in the trash, and then they go to the next one and they do something. It could be, it could be something that has a very discrete beginning and end, like those little, I'm thinking of sometimes those puzzles where it's really easy to fit the pieces into the wood
Yep.
puzzles
Yep.
or something like that. So yeah, I've worked with students at all levels, and I've always found students are able to do some level of skill independently.
And remember, there doesn't need to be multiple things within a work system when you first start. One task
It could
in
be
and
one
of
thing,
itself
okay.
can be the work system. Remember, you're teaching to their independence level, and so if that one task is what they can do and they have a 30-second independence level, then let's just do it. Let's embrace it, and
Yeah.
let's go there.
And then let's build.
And let's do it more often, because 30
Yeah.
seconds isn't a lot of time in a school day and in a home day. So really thinking about how many different entry points can I use this work system, and how do I expand that?
Right. And then the other piece of this is, so what instruction has that student received? And when I think of this one, I'm kind of thinking about a student who's in maybe a general education classroom, and they're maybe in a science or social studies class or a reading class, and they're doing some of the work within the classroom, but maybe that there needs to be a lot of modifications to what that student needs to do. And you're looking at what is the outcome of showing some comprehension or putting together the concept of whatever the instruction was in the classroom, and how can we kind of fit that into a work system?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times if we know, let's say a student really loves Movie Maker and they really want to put that together, but they have very poor organization skills and in putting their thoughts on paper, what we can do is set up in a work system of here's the area that you've expressed interest in. Here's what you completed for your inventory in the classroom. We'll put that in the first drawer. And the first drawer instructions might say, read what you wrote in class. Then the second drawer might have a storyboard in it, which is just a bunch of different squares, which movie writers will use to plan out how they're going to film their movie. Then the student has to actually write out what they want to do in each clip. And the third thing in the work system could be going to the computer and videotaping themselves demonstrating that skill set and submitting it to the teacher online.
Great.
So another neat way to do as a work system.
It takes a lot of creativity at times, or it can.
It can.
Yeah.
It can. It's really just talking to colleagues about it, because we all have this knowledge in our heads.
Mm-hmm. And getting ideas from families, and yeah, definitely. Another piece of this creating a work system is, how are they going to demonstrate? So that's what we asked you at the beginning, and you guys had some great ideas. So you can put things together, complete tasks, make a model, written expression, verbal listening, and receptive. And we're going to talk about specifics here. So we want you to walk away with some ideas of some things you might think about for putting something together. And please don't take these ideas as like this is the only ways to put something together. Hopefully you'll look at some of these and go, oh, that makes me think of something else. But for some kind of good skills, like just putting together, I can't remember what we used to call those when I worked in restaurants, but when you take the fork, spoon, and knife, the table sets, and roll them into a napkin, any type of collating papers, puzzles, you're kind of putting something together, putting pictures of an event into sequence. I know when we talked about this, we talked about if you have pictures of a student doing something throughout their day, so that they're maybe getting on the bus, getting off the bus at school, walking into the classroom, hanging up their coat. You want to make sure that there's not too many steps. But if you just even have 3 things and they put, here's what happened here, here, and here to help teach that sequence, doing it, I am not a big fan of sequence cards that you can purchase and buy in stores. Are you?
They're not really meaningful, Danielle. I think that, sometimes kids will learn them as a rote skill. And it might be nice to teach like first, next, then.
Yeah.
But there's really minimal, meaningful connection to self, and we know that it's very powerful when we can connect it to ourselves.
Yeah, and we have such a great ability with technology now to do that, where we can take meaningful pictures pretty easily and print them out, cut them out.
Make our own cards.
Yep, exactly. And putting together, it could be putting together a skill like putting together furniture, and I think IKEA, but the thing, simple things that you're just putting together. I liked your idea of assembling a flashlight.
Mm-hmm.
What a great safety skill, and kind of a fun thing, an interesting thing as well. May not work for all students, but that would be a nice little skill to put in there. So just anything that you can put together.
I saw a student today using those model cars. you know, the little packages or whatever that you can buy. I think Michael sells them or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah.
And you put together these little cards. This kid's very interested in cars. And they're like, wow, we could really put this in a work system. And he can do it independently. And then we can actually put it in the art display because it's the work that he's done because he's going to take it to art. And they just went all over the place with it. It was fantastic because they just took a kid who had minimal independence abilities from what we could measure in school and listened to what the family said about what he's really interested in. And now we're doing it in the school day, which is really exciting.
The next one is kind of completing a task or an activity. So we talked about transitioning, and we're going to show you a specific example of that in a minute, of transitioning around school, home, community. But some tasks are things like mail delivery, collating and sorting mail in offices, stocking food. So that's a great one that could be done at home or in other places. So they're learning to take and put labels on shelves that go in the right places and doing some matching there. Organizing, cleaning.
A really popular one, Daniel, that I'm starting to see more and more of is resorting books in a library.
Yes.
Kids are really good with numbers and codes, and again, it really works that strength of matching. But talk about a really fun way to get to know what's in your library, and just a very easy thing to do in any school, because we constantly have books that need to be put away.
There's also things like watering plants, caring for class pets. I remember we used a task analysis in a sense, and we're using it to teach a student to independently fill a pop machine. And this is a student who is nonverbal, serious movement needs, definitely had aggression at times, had a lot of medical situations where he had difficulties with teeth and would have real sudden aggressive outbursts towards himself, typically, self-injurious behavior. Not a lot of typical skills you'd see in a student for his age. But you know, in 5th, 6th grade, he was at that level, and it took a while, but it was amazing to see the student independently go through the steps of getting the keys to the pop machine, going to the storage room, bringing the sodas out, opening up the door of the machine, replacing all, matching which sodas went in which places, and was able to do it completely independently. And it's like such a great pre-skill in 5th or 6th grade. He's doing that for his eventual, hopefully, employed work setting as he got older. So there's lots of things that you can do looking at your school. This is where really sitting around with the team and just, if we can find those 15, 20 minutes to meet as a team and go, what are the things that we can do that this student could be doing to kind of do some things independently and motivating, engaging to prepare for future employed work.
Daniel,
you'll be surprised what you come up with.
I have one building that's done a really great thing, and I'm sure it's not just isolated to this one building. I'm sure it's out there more. But they met with their school secretaries and the custodial team and said, what are some things that you guys do routinely that maybe one of our students could do, and you would like to interview a student for this job? And so they have a job posting board by their main office, and any kid, typical, atypical, can apply for these jobs. And they get to do these types of things, and the janitor or the school secretary is their boss, per se. And it's kind of a nice way to do that when you look at completing a task. Really use the resources within your buildings. Don't feel like this is all on you to figure it out. Have that sidebar conversation when you're still sitting at your desk at 7 o'clock at night with the janitor who's emptying the trash cans.
So we said we were going to talk about transitioning around the school, and this was a really unique, so these are pieces of Elmo, and this is kind of what it looks like. So you can see that these little pieces of Elmo are Velcroed on. So Jem, walk us through how this fit into a work system to teach a student to navigate the school.
Yeah, so this student was having a really hard time entering into the school building, and we know that this student likes Elmo, and so we decided let's create a scavenger hunt for this student to know where to walk throughout the building instead of getting so distracted by all the other things that are going on visually within this environment. Let's go ahead and let's have her look for these pieces and be very, very mindful about it. Set them up in where our baseline shows us how far she can walk independently. And instead of just having it be such a larger type of task, let's go ahead and isolate it, make it really, really small, really achievable for her. And it's a pretty decent distance that she has to go from point A to point B. But before we started something like this, the student needed us to hold on to her and needed us to constantly be guiding her down the hallway to get to her location. Now she's greeted at the door, hey, welcome to school today, hand it this card, and the staff just keep an eye out for her, and she is able to manage this hallway within a very timely fashion from point A to point B. So the system is met with her very visually organizing by handing her, you can see right there that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts to this work system. And the destination is visually represented to her at the top where she needs to go upon entry. She needs to get to these cubbies. And so she has to collect and build Elmo to get to the cubbies. When she gets to those cubbies, she's completed that work system, and she's greeted with her next work system for the cubbies.
So are these little pieces kind of distributed throughout on the way to her final destination, and she's picking them up along the way? And
they are, and they are based on this this puzzle was put together. We started out with more pieces, to be honest with you, Daniel, because her ability to walk independently was far less. So we started out, I think, with 12 pieces to build it together.
Okay, and then you faded those out.
And now we're down, I think, to these 5 pieces.
Yeah. And so, at some point, the expectation is she kind of comes in and you just go right over to where she's at.
The reason why the cubby visual is paired with this is because we're hoping that this work system will fade itself out, and she can just be greeted, or her parents can just hand her, or the bus driver can give her this visual of what destination she needs to go to in order to get to the next place that she's being asked to go to.
Great. All right. All right. The next piece here is completing a model or artwork. Do you want to talk through this one a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're looking at completing a model or completing some artwork, here's just some ideas. You can complete a centerpiece for a table. We're constantly having holiday shows or holiday parties. So looking at some holiday art, putting those things in there based on high interest. Any paints, clay, finger paints, talk to your art teachers, talk to your specialty area teachers. Really, really helpful. Create that birthday card. Looking at digital photography, use of the computer, being able to, again, break things apart and put them back together to complete that model or that task.
I've done a lot of work with students where we would just, have them take pictures. We talk about how to take pictures and do different things, and teach them that skill, and then let them then manipulate the images on a camera. So kind of the work system, the steps of that might be going to get the camera, going to a location to take a few pictures, going back to the computer to load them up, and then being able to do some digital manipulation. And we'll talk about some ways to kind of enter and exit each of those phases too.
Yeah, and a fun way to do that one would be if you were to do, say, a 3-drawer system, and the first drawer is a new lens that the student's never seen, attached with a brief on how to use this new lens, and they have to read about that. I know Parenthood, actually, our TV show Parenthood is doing something really neat right now with their main character, Max, who has autism on the show, and he's into digital photography, and the owner of the photography store, One Man Business, is breaking down how to do photography for this student. He's indirectly putting work systems in place for Max, the character, to be successful within a photography shop.
And I would say, we're talking a lot of instances. I want to bring back to kind of language arts and math skills. You can look at each of these and figure ways to incorporate strong language arts and math skills as well.
Absolutely.
So you don't have to, again, be, and you're working on reinforcing independent skills, so it's not necessarily that it's different than sitting down and teaching students new sight words and things, but for mastered sight words, for mastered academic, or for students who are academically, able to do grade level work.
Even for students who are not able to do that grade level work, we have some kids, Daniel, that we're really using. Parents are sending pictures into school, teachers are printing them out, and they're putting it into Readers Writers workshops. And so in Writers Workshop, the student has their work system, and in the top drawer is a picture of what they did over the weekend with their sister, and they're color coding the parts of speech, and they've already preset that, and the student's just color matching for now. Sure. But by the end of the system, they've done 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages, however long they can sustain doing color matching. They've actually made a book, and the teachers are either running it through a laminator, sliding it in some paper sleeves, stapling it together, And now you've got a text for that student to be able to read that is connected to their personal interest and expands on their library of things that they can look at for independence.
And then it's also matching that to what's happening in the general education too. So they're also getting the benefit of all the things happening around them.
Absolutely.
Right. All right. Another piece here is with written expression. So again, cards. You were talking about making copies. Kind of run us through that example a little bit.
Yeah, I think when you look at a work system for making copies, there's so many steps in there, but it's, man, is it routine. It is the same thing that you do every single time. You arrive at the copier, you punch in your code, you place the items either on the feeder or on the screen, and you press the copy button. You wait patiently, employing a waiting strategy right here because that's really hard, either sing a song or count to 20 or whatever it might be. And then you grab the items off the end of the printer, which are put out at the same exact spot every single time from the copier, and then you grab those items and you carry them back to the destination. Copiers are fantastic work systems. Task analyze the process and put the system together. You can pair it with video modeling like we've talked about, Daniel, and voila, you have a written expression opportunity for that student.
I know one of the things that I had heard, and I can't remember where I heard this, but in terms of motivating students, a lot of students on the spectrum do not like open-ended writing assignments.
Yeah.
Very, very difficult because it's not meaningful, and it's very hard. It's hard for many students just to say, write, even when you're given a topic sentence, and not all students, but some students really struggle with that open-ended piece. So to try to ground it, make it more meaningful, if you say, write a letter to the school newspaper. What do you want people to know? Students that know that what they are going to be given is going to be published or read, or if the principal is a high status person, say, tell the principal your thoughts on blank. And you may have to modify the writing assignment or the topic for a student, but you can find ways to fit that into a work system.
Absolutely. And I think really working towards a student's strengths here, like if you need to use the word bank, you can use that. If you need to use color coding, you can use that. But really being meaningful using that closed procedure process.
And if you're doing things, I liked your idea, checking items off a list to make it more meaningful. You can use stamps and use a stamp of a student a student finds interesting, or markers to make that more interesting. You can put in for those students, I'm thinking again for a literacy block, engage, I know that a piece of Common Core is more focused on like poetry and other types of expressive forms. So you could have, once again, the students able to do some things independently. You could give them a topic, and once they kind of know the format, they could write independently different poems about different types of subjects.
Especially if you give them a really fun word bank where it does just naturally fit. Mad Libs is a popular written expression one, especially for students who are higher functioning that have that dry humor to them. Mad Libs is really kind of a fun way to play with that.
Yeah, Mad Libs are fantastic. Run us through, so again with written expression, how was this incorporated to get the student to be taking notes and working? Yeah,
so this is actually just a quick little work system written expression organization strategy for a student who's very interested in Angry Birds. The big question every time he walks into a new class period is, hey, what are we going to do in class today? And typically he will yell this out to the teacher in maybe not the nicest tone. Because the teacher hasn't communicated to him yet upon his arrival. Bell may not have rung yet. But the student is getting older, and him making these kinds of bids is getting a little bit more difficult to absorb. And so what's really nice about this is we've provided the student the opportunity to ask this question either to appear to the teacher, and the teacher has adopted this exact same visual support for her front board. Took a while. The teacher wasn't always willing to put this up on her board, but over time, all the kids started being like, "Hey, this is really kind of cool. I like this visual." So the student has the option to, writing's not a strength of his. However, it is a goal for him to use written expression. But in this particular case, we've given him choices. Either I will write a list or ask a peer to write the list of what we're doing in class today. I will write or ask a peer to write the homework assignment and what we're doing today. Another nice piece that's connected to this is when you write those things down and you break it apart, that's your work system for the history class that you're sitting in. That's your work system for the science lab you're getting ready to participate in. And a lot of times this can be done during the lecture. If you give it to a peer, if the student hands it over to a peer, you know how long teachers talk sometimes, Daniel, about the lecture, what we're going to do in class, and it's really amazing to see the student who's filling this out for the learner with a social learning difference is like, I don't know what we're doing in class today. And then they raise their hand and they ask, like, can you re-explain what are we doing in class today? But the hidden component to this, where you can add that really big need for intrinsic motivation, is we've added a token economy into this, a very sophisticated token economy. This student loses everything. He just seems, that's maybe a little extreme, but he just seems to lose a lot of things, and they get dumped in the bottom of the backpack or dumped in the bottom of the locker, or somebody lost it or stole it. And so we've attached each of these little cards, which we put into baseball sleeves, those little 9, the baseball collector sleeves.
Yep.
So we've attached each of these cards to the 8 classes that he has throughout the day. And if he has one of these cards, at the end of the day, he'll get 1 minute of accrued time. And he can cash in those 1 minute times or those dollar bills, but he prefers 1 minute. He loves to play on the computer. And so by the end of the week, we've built into his schedule that he can either cash them in school or cash them in at home. Parents are on board with this as well. And he gets an X amount of time of screen time for what he's done. And it's connecting it back to that. It's infusing the high interest of the Angry Birds, but also reconnecting it back to the what's in it for me factor. Wait a second, each of these are so valuable that it's really motivating for me to ask somebody to help me write my work system or to write it down myself so I can cash it in later.
That's great.
Very sophisticated system, but it's something that without this, I can tell you right now that student was not able to go into the gen ed classroom for longer than 5 minutes. Now he's able to stay within most of his classes the entire duration, with the exception of a couple where I don't think the interest is there. He might just be too smart.
That's great.
For the content.
In a previous slide, we mentioned the close procedure too, and some of you may be familiar. And for students that maybe just having an open-ended writing assignment inside of a work system as one of the tasks could be extremely hard, there's ways to work around that. One of them, you could have sentence strips, and then you could have another set of maybe in a Ziploc bag of different index cards with different words, and the student has to match, the correct noun with the correct sentence, or the correct verb with the correct sentence, or you can get as complicated or as simple as you want.
Absolutely.
With those types of things. You could do it just for students if you're working on writing. Maybe they are writing these words, but they have a word bank at the top of it, and they're matching that, and you're working on those grammar structures, or you're working on, if you're working with younger students on handwriting or anything like that, if they still work in handwriting in school, I'm not sure. And then also I did, we mentioned Mad Libs, and I actually found a Mad Libs app that on the Mad Libs website. I think it was even free, but you could kind of check that out, and that's just maybe a more, definitely that's one way to teach noun-verb agreement, a lot of creativity going in there. You could have students then, record their voice and speaking into it. You can do a lot of fun things.
Playing on intonation and expression. That'd be great.
Yeah. So another piece then was the verbal and listening. So one of the things that we wanted to just say, a quick warning, so if you implement any type of verbal or listening skills into a work system, remember this is something the student's supposed to be able to do independently, so you can't set the student up for failure in a sense that they're going to go have a conversation with someone who doesn't want to have a conversation or something like that, then that can be difficult. But you can set up the environment so that students could do some initiations. You could have, before the student goes to lunch, they go over to their folder, or they open their folder at a certain place, or if they're using the bins, they pull out the bin, and in that bin is sentence starters for the day, like open-ended questions, things that they're going to talk about that day. Having that student help work on what those questions are and making some different lists, but then they get to kind of pick one out so that they are practicing having different types of conversations each day. Absolutely. Things like that. Same thing with doing some other things if you want to, for some of our students that are having difficulty with reading decoding or reading fluency, and you want to just have them be able to listen to the content so that then you can have discussions around it. You could do this where they're listening to a book or a tape. So that they're getting that and fit that into a structured work system. Independent reading times would be an easy time to do that, and you could pair that with a visual timer so that once the visual timer goes off, then that's their cue to put that away and go to the next piece of the work system. So a few ideas there. And then a big one, and this is what I have seen a lot of people do and what we saw in that little video, is just a lot of receptive skills. Matching. You can do, there's some great stuff on the iPad for matching around, there's a lot of apps. I know that there's a whole strand of apps called like ABA apps where it's like matching nouns, matching verbs, and they have these huge banks, and they, I don't know the cost of some of those, but you can either create them yourselves or you can find some computer programs that teach language and receptive language so that students are building up their receptive vocabulary. Some teachers get very creative with file folder games and matching. You could assemble pictures of people through body parts, those types of things. This is one I just found online just looking. I just Googled body parts and I thought, oh, this is kind of funny. And so you could easily just kind of have, it has a word bank there for students to write into, but you're basically matching the word to the different body part. But if you wanted a student to be able to manipulate those, you could easily just make that Velcro, and where they're just pulling those things off the bottom and matching them to the top, and once it's filled out, voila, you're done, and you move on to the next
Another
piece.
fun way to do this one too is label makers. I know they're a little bit more expensive, but if you're kind of working on that typing and students really like stickers, label makers are a fun way.
This was a nice one I saw too. I think this was one of the in one of the schools you work in. Yep. And so you have students, and that looks very highly motivating, engaging. They're kind of digging around for letters, and then they're matching letters. Yep. Here's another one where you're matching colors to names. So they're matching the word to the color. And then you have one, describe the blocks in the string.
Yeah, working on patterns. Students really motivated by patterns, so giving them different colors to do an ABAB pattern.
Great. So those are some ideas for some students at some different levels as well. So when we talk about work systems and we're creating those, and actually really quick, I don't know if I have a slide in here, but I'm curious, what are other ideas of things? I want everyone right now, if you could just stop and type in something, an independent skill that you think you could do, incorporate into a work system. So each of those things we talked about would be one kind of work system activity, or you could break it apart and make a work system for that single activity. But what are some ideas for work systems? And we'll just pause for about 20 or 30 seconds. All right, so we had a couple people, thank you for giving us some ideas. So making a snack, great thing that you can incorporate into a work system. Getting clothes on to go outside was another one. Matching words to pictures, stuffing envelopes, and adding a stamp, definitely. Labels, addressing the envelope would work as well, all kinds of things. So we had some good ideas there. All right. So let's go on and let's talk. I appreciate you guys chiming in some ideas there. We want to give you a chance to think about some ways that you could incorporate some of those. You're also looking at considering the flow of the work system. So work systems really need to kind of, and I like that idea of flow, they just need to kind of move naturally. You should have some natural support. So students, that picture we showed of that kind of sand bin with letters in it, that is going to be naturally reinforcing for a lot of students. You don't need to follow up with any reinforcement system because this is naturally motivating and engaging. Talk to us a little bit of this concept of work systems flowing.
It's important when you look at it, and Schroffler's research would tell us that a work system needs to have fluidity to it, and it needs to make sense to the learner. So if you think about like when you're in a cafeteria, in the school cafeteria, and if there wasn't a flow to the traffic within the cafeteria, it seems like organized chaos. However, when there is a flow in there, it does seem more organized and students seem to be more calm. So the flow typically, when you are looking at something, should go from left to right. It should go in the natural progression of the way that we read, the way that we drive, kind of looking at those things. If there wasn't a system in place, there wasn't a flow to the traffic, we'd be in a traffic jam all the time. And so really looking at the work system in that capacity. If it doesn't make sense, if it doesn't provide clarity, if it doesn't have organization and identify clearly what needs to be done, the flow is wrong on the system.
Great. Another piece of this, when we're talking about this, you're really looking at how that's incorporated into that student's workspace. And you're looking at, we have kind of a little, kind of almost a task analysis here of how that works. So that the student views the list of activities to complete. They're going to initiate the first activity, places it in the work area, complete the activity, place the activity in the area designed for completed work, and then move to the next task until they're finished with the work system. That's kind of the flow of how a work system goes from beginning to end. You have an entry point, you have clear spaces of where things are happening, you have a clear exit point, and then you're kind of moving on to the next piece. And here's another picture there of a kind of file folders. So, if you had on one side, you have them labeled first, second, third, and then as they get finished, you put them in a file folder on the other side. So this would be one file folder right there, where on the left side of the file folder is what to do, and the right side is what's done. So that's just one example there. And the number of activities or how long are going to really, again, depend on student interest, motivation. It's going to depend on what your expectation is in your classroom of how you can chunk different parts of work into a work system and student attention and stamina. A big piece of this is task analyzing the work system, breaking it down into smaller components. So like when we said, someone had a great suggestion of make a snack. For different types of snack, you're going to need different steps probably. And you really just would you just write those out for the teacher, write those out, or the adult or the parent, you would just write those out so you know what the steps are, and then you translate those steps into something meaningful for the student.
And it's really important with the task analyses, and this is one of the evidence-based practices, and in the step-by-step it says you have to find that just right skill for when you're going to teach the task or what you're going to expect the student to already have mastered and be able to do independently. And so when you do the task analyses of something, say the student doesn't put a puzzle together independently from beginning to end, but they consistently put the last piece of the puzzle together. Guess what you can put in the work system?
Yeah.
A puzzle that's almost completely done except for that very last piece, and they pick up that last piece and they put it in, and oh my gosh, they just did it.
That's a great backward chaining. Yeah, I love that. We used to do that all the time to teach students to do puzzles independently. Even those 8-piece puzzles with the borders, some students cannot do the first piece, even when you kind of outline and do all that, but they can put in that last piece. And then you have them put in that last piece for 5-6 days, and then you have them put in the last 2 pieces. So
but by
great.
doing a task analysis, you're really providing yourself the visual instructions of what you're doing, and everybody is so clear on what the expectations are. You're creating this transparency, Daniel, that I don't think we remember that we need to do, because not everybody's in our head in the way that we're planning it and thinking about it.
So the task analysis should have all those key steps to complete the activity. And task analysis could be 3 steps, couple steps. It could be very long. I mean, when we did the pop machine one, there was a lot of steps to that. Some tasks have a lot of different steps. Sometimes it's going to be longer or shorter. Some students, when you say take a spelling test, they know all of the skills needed to take the spelling test. They know to get the piece of paper out, they know to number 1 through 20, and they know to put their name on it, and they know to wait for the teacher to say the word, and then they write it. Other students might need those steps broken out and listed in the task analysis in clear directions and prompts for them to do each of those steps. If you had, again, a top-down, bottom drawer, the first one might be the piece of paper. The next drawer might be the pencil. The next drawer might be, a prompt that has them write their name or match their name to the paper or something like that. Other students don't need that. So really, when you're task analyzing, you really got to be thinking about the developmental level and the individual learner. This is an example of a task analysis. Again, it's just breaking up 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. You can't necessarily read that too well, but just to give you an idea how simple it can be. It really can just be a series of steps with some check boxes next to it. And that is a task analysis for a learner.
And that one said put sentences in order, type your sentences up, and then show them to the teacher. You're all done. Step 4 was being done. Like, how cool is that? I actually can check that off. And it goes back to, sometimes we write a list and we put 3 or 4 things on it already so that we can cross them off.
And going back, we talked about you got to consider the environment, going back to when you're actually creating the work system, where are things going to be movable, static, who's setting it up, what types of materials are you going to use. So you just want to kind of go back to that. And thinking of your start and finish areas, maybe the student's able to work on the task on the carpet. You know, for some learners that's going to be really helpful. Others may not be able, that may not work too well to complete the task. So there's different options there as well. You want, a big piece of this is clear transition cues. So you have transition cues within a task and between tasks. So give me an example, Jen, of a within task transition cue.
An in-task transition cue could just be you're in the system and you close the drawer and you open the next drawer. That can be within the actual system. Within a task type of transition could be you wrote your name and you're moving into answering the first problem. That could be a transition in there, or you've just finished for cutting something and now you're going to glue it on. Those are transitions within that task itself. Transitions between the task and getting into the system and getting out of the system are a little bit harder, Daniel, because remember the task that you're having the student do is something they should be able to do independently. But between the tasks, this is where we get hung up a lot of times. How do I get the student into the work system? And this is where philosophically we have some pretty good discussions, because maybe that first thing in the task and in the activity is the most reinforcing thing to get them there, because we know how hard it is to initiate active engagement within an activity that is set up by somebody else. So the first thing in that top drawer is a quick little greeting from Buzz Lightyear, you know, and it's just on a quick little switch, or maybe it's, you know, we have a device that's pre-set up to show that. So having those types of things to get into the work system, oh my gosh, I wonder what this character is going to say to me today.
Well, you just gave me a great idea. If I go back into teaching, I'm going to set up a system where it's like a power card, and the student doesn't know what they're going to get, and it's going to be like a welcome from a favorite character.
Absolutely.
And something silly about, we're going to do this task, and you're going to do such a great job, and and
our teachers are doing that, Daniel, out there in the field, and it's really fantastic to see. And then getting out of the work system. To get out of the work system, if you've got the right visual schedule in place for the student, it can be as simple as a check schedule card to get out and to take the student back to their schedule to see what's coming next.
So for some transition cues within a task, when we talk to top, bottom, or left, right, it's kind of that natural progression. So each object is part of the task. So if the student is going to send a letter, we talked about someone had that suggestion, it's going to be the first thing is going to be a paper, and then the next one is a crayon, the next one's the envelope, and the next one's the folder.
Yep.
And this would be for a student. Now, you have some students that you could just put all those materials on a table and they could just write the letter.
Absolutely.
You don't need you would then have all four of those in one container for that student.
Right.
But if a student doesn't have that ability to just be able to go through that sequentially, then that work system can help that student go through that process independently. And I think with work systems, one of the reasons they're so effective is just moving from bin to bin or page to page or checkbox to checkbox, or, I mean, there's inherent natural reinforcement and motivation to go to the next piece.
You feel successful, and it doesn't matter where your typical, atypical development is. You're neurologically wired to have that successful feeling when you check things off your list, when you get things done. And so by using that and really helping that student learn the system, putting the paper in the top drawer, that's great. The student can just rip the paper. But having the crayon in the next drawer, you know, oh my gosh, I really love drawing. And then wait, having an envelope with a picture of my mom on the front of it, holy cow, I really want her to put this on the refrigerator. You know, this is great refrigerator artwork here. And then the folder, because I'm going to put it in my take-home folder. I mean, talk about motivation right there.
That's great. And then we also talked about a peer being a transitional cue. So, you know, the student could go over, and we've given an example where they can go over and ask a peer. And you could do that with a sibling as well in the home environment. So here's an example of top-down matching. So the numbers, so the student is matching from a schedule that they have. So they have like a mini schedule with a 1 on it, and then they take that 1 and find the workspace for whatever they're going to do there. And when they're finished with that, they go back over to their schedule, pull off the 2, and find the 2. The 1 and the 2 here are on top of each other, but they could, so this could be for one task of putting something together, but for different tasks, they could be around the room or around the building or however you want to do it.
Yep.
So transition cues between tasks. The last object in the activity could be the transitional cue to the next activity. So at the end of reading, the student is given the cue of the calculator, which then shows that they're going to start math time. And we talked about that empty desk syndrome sometimes. So sometimes having a cue that the student can already have a piece of the next activity is critically important, so that at least they have that expectation of what's happening next.
Right, and if you're looking at that example we just shared with you of at the end of reading, we give the student a calculator, and you think about all the silly things you can actually write in the calculator, like you can write hello by typing in, number 4, number 0, number 7, and number 0, and then flipping it upside down and showing it to someone else, and then the calculator says hello, but you typed in these numbers. Talk about a fun little way, like in the transition, they could use the calculator for a social greeting and talk through the hello, kind of thing. Kind of things that we've seen in practice, and a great transition cue available to the student to get from one activity and get out of one activity and into the next activity. And getting away from the idea, Daniel, that you first work and then you get a break, because that's just adding one more transition into the day. Why not infuse the break into the work that we're doing within the system instead of at the end of a system before the start of the next one?
That's great. And, starting new activities, especially in some classroom environments, is very, very tough for our students. And so maybe you match that student up with a peer who has no problem starting the activity, maybe a peer who could almost teach the class type peer, and maybe the transition, as the other students are getting kind of started up, maybe the student with autism has a cue to go over to that student and like they do a quick math game or something like that while the other students are setting up, and then that student, once it's a good input for that student to go in, that peer kind of leads the student over to then engage in the activity.
And I see that one being done a lot of times when we have peers who are able to script favorite movie characters and movie lines with that student. So if you have a student who really is all about Sonic right now or really all about Super Mario, having another student paired with them that's really all about Sonic or Super Mario, and they can just have a quick little banter. Again, another reinforcing, motivating opportunity for the students to engage with each other without saying you're on a break.
Yeah, good. Here's a left-right in task, or it looks like schedule throughout, and then that last icon there says check schedule. So you can see that the student's already been moving down the icons. The top green bar is the to-do. So the student got their coat. It looks like they went to the next activity. They hung up their backpack, or they hung up their coat. I think that's shoes, put their shoes away. Maybe they are changing shoes when they get to school. They put away their backpack. They're doing the next thing. They're doing the next thing. And they go through those, and then at the next one it'll say check schedule, and they go over to another schedule to go to the next piece of their day. So other transition cues. You can also have the teacher hand the student a transition cue, a check schedule card. So what can happen is, while the student's engaged in a work system, you could be setting up the next work system and the check schedule cue, or you could be resetting up their in-task schedule.
And sometimes, Daniel, I get the question of, well, you know what, Jen, that's great that they're able to do this independently, but what if they're doing it wrong within the work system? Well, you can add a teacher check component to the work system. And you can just, instead of your transition cue being check schedule, it could be a teacher check, or raise your hand and get, teacher's eyes on your work, or check your work, or get a grade on your work. And the teacher can come over and actually look at it. And then the next item on the in-task schedule could be within the work system to correct any errors in your work. That can be built into the system. And so I don't recommend that for all of our students, but for our students that are of a level that can accept that type of feedback, by all means, go ahead and build that into the system and let it happen.
So you could have a transition cue where at the end the student has a little picture or prompt to raise their hand or check their work or get the students, however the teacher or the educator or the parent wants them to, for homework. Think about that at home. at the end of that, they have to go over and then bring it to the parent to let them know they're done and put that into the homework system.
Visual timers are also a good one on this because it really does help students pace themselves throughout it. There's lots of fantastic timers out there that have different colors, and you can color code match it to the different items within the work system. I've seen people use digital timers on the top of a work system and tell the student that they have from this chunk of time to this chunk of time, and then inside each drawer is a smaller timer that says this should take you 10 minutes, this should take you 8 minutes, this should take you 4 minutes.
And here's just a picture of a visual timer. They make them, they have apps, they have all kinds of things. You can get them digitally, you can get them with batteries, all types. In-task systems, so this is just, we wanted to give you a couple examples discreetly of different tasks. So this would be for a very basic level independent activity. So you have 4 bins, either left to right or top to bottom, and the student pulls out a paintbrush, and then the next one they get the paint, they get the paper, and then the 4th one, maybe there's a clip and there's a drying rack, and they know that they go hang up their artwork there. So that would be that student being able to go through an artwork system. Here's one for a content area, so maybe a student. So in this, and it could be bins. This could also just be part of, this could be in a folder or in file folders as well, like we showed at the beginning. So you have independent reading, and you have a visual timer that says how long you're going to read this section. And then you have vocabulary cards where you got to mix the cards to the definitions. If you could tie that into the reading assignment, that would be ideal if it's a nonfiction text or something like that. And then the next piece is maybe they go over to a computer and they do a writing. You have some writing software on there, and again, maybe match that with a visual timer so they know when to be done. And then in the next one, they have a cue to print their work. And in the last one, the teacher is checking it. So again, it's really getting them. I know I did reading workshop when I was a general ed teacher, and I really wish I had used some structured work systems for a few of my students that may not have had autism, but just helping them know how long to spend on each piece of it. And then as a teacher, especially if you have multiple students, it's hard, and general ed teachers, it's hard to remember to check in with certain students to make sure they're following up. So if you can create a work system where they are checking in with you and showing you what you did, it makes it so much easier for the teacher.
And the evidence-based practice that fits nicely here with work systems is self-monitoring. Yep. And that nice component there, and really working to that.
And there's a nice self-monitoring module on the Autism Internet module website as well. And MPDC also has some instructions for that. Here's one for maybe a high school student, and you have shelves and a locker. So that high school student that has a really hard time organizing their things, or they have a backpack, or a middle school student. I had a middle school student once whose backpack would, first of all, the thing weighed probably 80 pounds. I don't know how they carry those things around. But if you could have a space, and maybe you don't have lockers in your schools, maybe you could create something that had this space for the student where they could come in, maybe match it with some sensory regulation activities or something like that, but go in and they would have it clearly on shelves or in bins and shelves, have the things they needed for each of their classes. And how much less stressful would that make that for some students? You can even add a shelf for things when they go back for each one, the pieces of that class that they need to take home that night for homework, and then that goes in one thing that they then take home. So there's some different ways you can play around with that. Here's a work system. Again, we have the numbers here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 12 from top to bottom, and then you have the blue. So why are some of these green and then the other side blue?
This is a work system for the entire school day based on the class periods that are set up for that school day. And we have A days and we have B days. And so we have to have a work system set up for each type of day because the schedule changes for that. So it's just really helping us stay organized for the student. And in the student's mind, it didn't make sense to only have an one-day schedule with a couple extra drawers for the B day. Rather, he really felt that having A day and B day drawers made most sense because they're two separate kind of days.
Great. So along with this, you want to kind of think of making a list of what types of materials you're going to need for your activity. So if you're creating a work system, along with that task analysis, is making a resource list. So what do you need for an in-task activity of writing a paper? You know, what are some materials you'll need for that versus a science lab or something like that. So remember, work systems, they need to really tell the student what work are they doing, how much work, how the student knows when they're finished, and what's happening next. So a work system should be able to answer those questions for a student clearly. In addition, when you're teaching, you really want to teach the purpose of the work system to students, and again, even presuming competence with those students who may be nonverbal or we're unsure or they're still learning to more skillfully communicate with us and using different devices or pictures or signs, that we can still explain the work system to those students.
A really great way to do this one is to use social narratives and video modeling. Having a peer model that and videotape that is really great. I know some of our video modeling experts within the state would probably agree with that statement, that video modeling is underutilized when paired with work systems. And so using that more often to help the student understand how to use the system and just really teach that. Avoiding that hand-to-hand guidance, that hand-over-hand type guidance, because remembering a work system is independent.
Mm-hmm. Is it okay to kind of sit back and wait to see what the student will do for 30 seconds, a minute,
Absolutely.
a minute and a half?
And if you set it up right and you taught it already, let the student figure it out. Remember, you get a chance. You get this one chance to really set up this work system to let the student be independent. So by golly, let them have that opportunity. And, you know, sometimes we don't always engage immediately within the first 3 to 5 seconds of being shown something. So
we have a hard time even waiting. If you ever just wait, count to 30 sometimes, and it's only 30 seconds, and it feels like forever. It's very hard for us. We want to jump in and prompt and assist. But what students learn is that getting that task done, part of that is the person coming in and prompting us.
Absolutely.
So we get a lot of prompt dependency with our students. So we really need to kind of be prepared to be thinking about that.
Absolutely, and making sure you guys are using some of those other practices that you know how to use already, with like having a power card for if I'm stuck in my work system, what can I do? Have that social narrative put in there. So just being mindful of that.
We want to test the system. So to test the system, before the student goes in there, have a teacher, peer, sibling go through the system and just see if it makes sense. See if they can figure out what they're supposed to do throughout the system. If there's a breakdown, try to figure out what that is, and you may have to rescaffold and task analyze where the breakdown occurred.
Don't forget to collect data though, guys. I think that that's really important. Really looking at how long did the student engage in the task from beginning to end. Did they complete the work? And did they request help when needed? And if not, how long did they sit there and wait before requesting help, and do I need to put a support in place for that? Yeah. So really looking at that data collection and being mindful about it. You don't have to take data every single time the student enters the work system, but really be thoughtful to get a good data collection snapshot of how the student's doing.
And if you want to teach requesting help, you could use a little icon. Some great ways to do that with students who have a lot of significant needs. Doing things like taking a preferred object and that has a lid and tightening it so that the student couldn't get it off, and they want to get in there, whether it's bubbles or food or something like that, and teach them that if they hand you this card, you will help them open it or you will help them do something. So there's a lot of ways to be able to teach students help through using pictures or gestures or things like that.
And voice output devices too, guys, there. Having a help button on each of the desks, a talking item, because again, we're so busy sometimes. We're hoping the student's going to be doing this independently. We're planning for them to be independent, and they're queuing and they're asking for help, but we don't even see it because we're doing other things. So getting that auditory cue on there, be it a bell, be it a dinger, be it a buzzer, be it a good old-fashioned Big Mac device. Yeah.
So teach and monitor the data collection system. You're looking at kind of independence and accuracy. It's a little different type of data collection than what you do with maybe discrete trial or something. You can be looking at independence with some of that, but again, that's so prompt heavy. You're really looking at the student engaging throughout the work system. So we want to remember, we all use work systems. When we work, we set up our own. In my cubicle world, I have my own kind of system for where papers are. Kind of moves around a lot, but we kind of set it up. And you'll find people, if you look at certain people and that their work system looks like we can't figure it out, but it works for them. We have to remember that even us as neurotypicals, we have our own systems of how we need things. And if someone else came into my cubicle and rearranged things, I mean, it drives me nuts when I can't find what I'm looking for. So having that student be a part of that is huge.
That shared ownership. And if you feel like, gosh, I can't really get the information from the student, as an educator, you really need to be communicating with the family and figuring out how mom and dad are setting things up, how mom and dad are putting things together at home, how grandmas and grandpas, or what's their therapist, how's the therapist at home putting that system in place, and being mindful that, you know, those social cues and those environments are really helping us figure out what and how that system should be set up for the student.
And can you talk us through, so how have you taught students to help set up their own work systems? For students that once they kind of get the idea of it, how have you helped the student kind of figure that out?
I have passed the baton over to them and really asked the key question, Daniel, is this working for you, or what would you change about it? After you teach the system and let the student work in it, they start to figure out what works best for them, and kind of dialogue, really. For the students that really are wanting to change their system, have a conversation with them. How are you setting your room up at home? What are you doing with your kitchen table and your homework? What does that look like for you in your locker? What are you doing in science class? Just really talking, Daniel, about it. Video modeling, not video modeling, but videotaping the student using the system, and then asking why you're watching it, what worked, what didn't work, would you like to change something? For a student who is less communicative and uses more of their behaviors to convey their message, I really will be looking at how long they're able to sustain and persist in different types of activities that are in the work system, and taking that data and sharing that with team members and the student whenever possible. So
remembering that all behavior is some form of communication, and just by observing the student using the work system, they are telling us how well it's working.
Absolutely.
All right, great. So as we wrap up, work systems need to make sense to that learner. You really need to start with high preferred, high interest, independent tasks. You are not going to start a work system on the thing that you wish the student was always doing and they're not. You might get there, but again, it's independent, high preferred. You want to teach them what is a work system before, and by doing that, you need to use those high preferred independence. And making sure that you're practicing with someone who kind of knows the system. Try to ensure that it's developmentally and age-appropriate activities. This is a big thing I talk about often, is that you can have an activity for a student that's maybe matching as kind of where they're at in pre-academic skills. You can have some matching activities that are completely age-appropriate, like Uno, for example, the card game. But then there's other things like Go Fish, which really is not something, high schoolers may enjoy that, but they enjoy it for not the same reasons they enjoy Uno. And it can be stigmatizing in those types of things. So you want to find both developmentally appropriate and age-appropriate activities. Again, as we said, and reinforce what Jen said, video modeling, huge in teaching students to use those work systems independently. If you can't video model a student, you can video model another peer. Research has shown when you video model someone who looks more like the peer, so if it's a boy, use a boy. If the boy always likes to wear a red shirt, have the boy you're video modeling wear a red shirt. The more similar the person in the video model is to the actual person you're trying to teach, the better it usually works out. And making sure we're task analyzing those skills. If we come into barriers, look at the list from beginning to end. What do you have to do to complete the skill? And find out that point where that student's having difficulty.
I think a big thing, Daniel, that we need to remember is connecting to the families with that structured work system. Really discuss those routines at home with the family. Ask them, is there a routine at home that we could just put together a work system for you that would really allow your child to be more independent, and can we help you with that? Or would you like us to make that for you? Or can I give you guidance on that? Or are you already using this, because we need to be doing it similarly here at school? So starting that dialogue and sharing those visual supports of the work system with the family, developing any of those social narratives and resources for parents.
There's a really good, on the Autism Internet module website, there's a really good module on social narratives. So those are things like social stories, power cards, cartooning, and you could even have a social narrative of the students going through a specific work system and create that, and that's something that the parent could share with the student to prime them before coming to school during the day or something like that. It's just that nice connection there. This is just a list of some statewide parent organizations that support families. It's always good to assist families with finding information. I know that a couple places that are really good at on the medical side, when we often educators aren't sure where to refer parents, like regional centers can help families find respite care. I know also Wisconsin First Step also does a lot of that in helping families find needed resources. I want to just very quickly just state that everything we kind of discussed today kind of fits in with existing DPI frameworks and initiatives through our department. If you look at Wisconsin's guiding principles for teaching and learning, structured work systems really building into the strengths and experiences of students bringing to learning. That's a big piece of it. If we look at educator effectiveness, we're using the Danielson framework in Wisconsin. And if you're using structured work systems, you could use some of these step-by-step instructions and implementation checklists. You should check and see if you can use these for artifacts for how you're planning and preparing your curriculum, developing instruction, etc. So, a big piece of that framework really fits in some of the components of structured work systems. They can help manage student behavior. They involve organizing physical space. They really are focused on engaging students in learning. So you can use these pieces to help show artifacts in your learning around that. And then finally, the structured work systems, that could be considered a positive behavior intervention, certainly can be included in a student's IEP, that you're using that methodology. And I would encourage you to, send people to the Autism Internet Modules or MPDC website to, let families know kind of what this is, or other team members or general education teachers, and just say, hey, here's a module with some information that kind of shows you what we're doing here. The Teach website is fantastic. They have a lot of great resources on there. So I would highly encourage you to check out the Teach articles. They even have some articles on, what it is, what it isn't, and some other good ideas. You'll be getting a webinar survey. It really does help to get the feedback, guys. I mean, it helps me be able to continue to do high-quality webinars. Even if you're watching this as a video, it helps to send that, and there is a webinar option for people watching this as a recorded webinar. Thank you, Jen, for helping me out with these. This has been great. Everyone have a great time. We're going to sign off, and we'll just hang on and might answer a few questions if there are any.